And welcome back to the Owl Pod, the official podcast of Temple Athletics. I'm your host, Kevin Copp, and my guest today is Dr. Claudrena Harold. Dr. Harold is a professor of African American and African Studies and History at the University of Virginia. But before that, she was a 1997 graduate of Temple, where she played women's basketball for 3 seasons for the Owls. At the time she graduated, she ranked third in program history in points per game and is still, to this day, in the top 5 all-time in that category. She was inducted into the Temple Athletics Hall of Fame in 2010, and her name hangs in the Liacouras Center rafters as part of Temple's Ring of Honor. She was also the keynote speaker at this past week's Stella Awards, which is where we had the chance to talk to her before she addressed this year's class of Temple student-athletes at our annual banquet. I want to note before we get to the interview, this is my last episode of the Owl Pod for the season. David and Amelia will be back one more time next week for a final Owl Pod sign-off and to welcome 2 new student-athletes who will be carrying the torch forward for their fun and insightful interviews next fall. So make sure to check that out before we go on our summer hiatus. But I do want to say a thank you to everyone before this episode starts for listening this year. This has been such a great honor and really just a fun treat to get to sit down with some longtime friends, colleagues, or great Temple Owls that I've admired from afar, get to bring you their stories and have some really fun and interesting conversations. There are over 50 episodes in the archives, so if you've missed any of them, I would encourage you to scroll back, check them out, check out anything you missed from this past year right here in the feed. So, without further ado, here is Dr. Claudrena Harold after this quick word from our Owl Pod sponsors.
And we're back with the action. Coke Zero Sugar might be the best Coke ever.
That's right, Jim. With an irresistible taste and zero sugar, Coke Zero Sugar is a must-try for any sports fan. So make sure you... Wait, Jim, I didn't mean try it right now. We're still on the air.
Best Coke ever? Take a taste, Jen.
Really?
No, not right now, Jen. We got a game to call.
This is so wonderful to have you back here at Temple, and I'm wondering, you played from 94 to 97. You were inducted into the Temple Hall of Fame in 2010, but how many chances have you had to come back to Philadelphia? Now here as the guest speaker for the Stella's Awards here in 2026. How many times have you had the ability to come back to campus? Because, I'm sure it has changed enormously since, it's changed enormously since 2010, to say nothing of 1994 to 97. It's probably unrecognizable in some ways. So how often have you had the chance to come back?
I come back often to Temple and to Philadelphia because of just the work that I do in terms of being, a scholar. And I've written a few books. So I've been invited, interestingly enough, about 3 times to the University of Pennsylvania to give talks, and anytime I'm back in Philly, I come through Temple, and I also make film. And one of the best film festivals in the country and the world is Black Star Film Festival, which is held in Philadelphia every August, usually late July, early August, and so I always come back.
So take me back to, I guess, the first time you came here. Now, did you have any familiarity with Philadelphia before you came here to play basketball in 94, before you came here as a student? You came from Jacksonville, is that right?
Right, I came from Jacksonville, Florida. Okay. So my familiarity with Philadelphia was, of course, Julius Erving and the Sitzers and music, Philadelphia International. I grew up in a household in which Teddy Pendergrass and the OJs were constants. My uncle was also a music producer, so he actually produced B.B. King's album, sort of his 1973 classic, To Know You Is to Love You. And so he produced that record at Sigma Studios. I didn't know that then. I know that now. And of course, I grew up watching those sort of legendary John Chaney teams. And John Chaney is actually a native of Jacksonville, Florida.
It's a fun connection.
Fun connection. So I knew Mark Macon.
Okay.
I knew of Mark Macon.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was familiar with Philadelphia and Temple. And so when I had the opportunity to come here and Temple recruited me, it was very fascinating to me. I was interested in going away from Jacksonville, from Florida, and having the opportunity to live in Philadelphia, in a global city, was very attractive. And I think by that time, I was thinking about the entire college experience and not just what happened like between the lines. And Temple was just exciting. I think I came to visit during spring fling, and that just it just sold me. It was amazing. I remember running into Tim Perry in the airport. And it was it's just an amazing place. It was so live, and it was so different than anything that I had experienced. And so it was really love at first sight.
Well, I want to get to all of the different ways that Temple has shaped you in the intervening years, but I do have to ask from an athletics perspective, just what that was like for you. You have a tremendously successful career here. At the time that you finished third all-time in scoring average. Again, as we said, Philadelphia, Big Five honors, Temple Hall of Fame. Your name is hanging in the building in the Ring of Honor. So, I mean, a decorated career here. What was your Temple student-athlete experience like?
It was everything and in between. So by my sixth game at Temple, I had lost more than I did my entire high school career. I finished my high school career with a team, Ribault High School. We were on a 69-game winning streak. So I hadn't lost since my fifth game. No, it may have been fourth. I can't even remember. In 11th grade. And so that was like, okay, that was an adjustment. My first year, I think I averaged 18 points. I remember I shot 20 times my first game against James Madison, and I remember Coach Curtis saying, "You don't have to shoot every time." But it was so exciting, like being a student athlete, playing in the gym, going to the gym and seeing all of the fellas come back, Eddie Jones, Aaron McKee. These folks were constant, even though they graduated the year before I got here. It was just exciting. Everything was exciting, playing in the A10s. We were not winning, but individually, I was having success on the court and off the court. And it was just an exciting time to be in Philadelphia. Temple, just being a student athlete at Temple was, it was like the land of all possibilities. In some ways, except winning, but it was a great time. Getting to understand the city rivalries, St. Joe's and UPenn. It was awesome, and so much has changed in women's basketball in terms of just the excitement and the level of investment. But even still, back then, it was the place to be. It was definitely the place to be.
Well, you've mentioned the connectivity between the women's program and the men's program, and obviously at this time, on the men's side, you have John Chaney, who is just almost a mythical figure in the sport. And I'm wondering, did you have the opportunity to cross paths with Coach Chaney? Was there any of that that rubbed off on you in your time here?
Most definitely. So on my visit, I remember Coach Curtis taking me to John Chaney's office, and I remember him saying, "What's up, homegirl?" And once a year, I would try to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and attend a 5:30 practice. I wasn't much of a defensive player, so the matchup zone was I wasn't completely invested. But just to have the opportunity to hear John Chaney go over the X's and O's, but to also extend that conversation into a discussion about life, about what it means to develop the full person, about what it means to have character, about what it means to have resilience, about what it means to be in a community. So I find myself a lot of times, and I've read his book, going back and thinking about the matchup zone and how the matchup zone was not just a sort of defensive strategy, but it was about life. So he was a larger than life character, and there were some great players. Mark Jackson was here. They had some great teams. Jason Ivey, Johnny Miller, just a lot. Pepe Sanchez,
Yeah.
and so it was cool. And a lot of us lived in either Johnson or Peabody or Temple Tower, so it was definitely a connection. Definitely a connection.
All right. Well, I heard your commencement address at UVA in 2022. You described the experience here at Temple as transformative, and I know that that is referring not just to your time as a student athlete, but as a student here. And do I have right that you made the decision to graduate early?
I did.
Okay, so tell me about, while all of this is going on and you're having at least the individual success on the court, you're developing as a student athlete, tell me about the academic pursuit and where that's leading you while all this is happening.
Right. So I entered the portal of life. A lot of academic opportunities. I came here majoring in business. In my first semester, I took a course that was taught by Mario Beatty, and it was African history course, and it just blew me away. And I followed that trajectory, and so I majored in African American studies. I minored in history, though I could have majored in history. I only needed one more class. And by my second year, I was having such a phenomenal academic experience. I had amazing teachers, amazing mentors who were like, you should think about graduate school. I grew up in a working class family with a few nurses and teachers here and there. And so when I was growing up and, you were smart, they said, well, you can be a nurse or a lawyer or a doctor. And I never thought about the life of the mind and being a professor. And Temple opened that possibility up for me. They had a PhD program in African American and African Studies. And so I'm also seeing people who look like me get PhDs. And so by my second year, I said, I love basketball. It's fun, but there's more that I want to pursue. And basketball, in many ways, it's enforcing that. We're traveling to Massachusetts and we're traveling to DC and we're traveling to all these places, and the coaches are letting us go to museums. And so they didn't do themselves any favor by cultivating this student athlete.
They should have kept you in that hotel in the conference room.
They should have kept me in Doubletree, and back then we would spend all of our holiday breaks. We lived in Doubletree, and so December and January were really transformative. And so I had this amazing educational experience, and it was a world of possibilities. And I flipped the script, and I still remember having butterflies going into the Coach Foley's office and saying, I'm going to graduate early. But this is what I love about Temple, and I will forever be grateful. When I made that decision and I needed to take another class in the summer, coaches, the academic support team, they said, we got you. And to be honest, I was nervous because I was like, okay, what if they get mad and say, you know what? Yeah, well, you can't, you paid us $16,000. And that was a fear of mine. I didn't even tell my mom what I was doing.
Yeah.
But Temple provided that support. And I have friends who attended other universities who didn't get that kind of support, even when they played 4 years. And so that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm eternally grateful.
Now that leads you through, you got your PhD at Notre Dame?
I get my PhD at Notre Dame, so I have a bridge year. In that year that I could have been hooping, I was prepping for the GREs and working on my graduate application packet. and I applied to a few places, and Notre Dame was interested. They gave me a full ride, um, stipend, and so I go from Philly to a bridge year where I taught math and science in Jacksonville Middle School. And I was like, yeah, I'm definitely ready for graduate school. And then I went to Notre Dame. And Notre Dame and Temple are like opposite in every sense of the word. And Temple prepared me for the ability to move and groove and thrive in any kind of place. And then I graduated from Notre Dame with my PhD in 2004, and I got 4 job offers. And Temple was always my model. So 2 of those offers were at, major schools in major cities, Cincinnati and Memphis. And then University of Virginia came calling. And I was really leaning towards Cincinnati and Memphis because Temple was the model of, an urban school, a diverse school. And my advisor said, you got to go to UVA. And I did, and I'm grateful for it. But I wouldn't have made it without this place.
Well, it's interesting you said that about Temple and Notre Dame being opposites, because you can make the same case about Temple and UVA as kind of the archetypal model of the college town. It's obviously, as we'll get into, kind of loaded in terms of its racial history, and there's a lot there when it comes to UVA. And having grown up in the Philadelphia area myself, and I went to school at the University of Georgia, so I made that similar. You and I were on reverse trajectories. You came north and ended up going back south. I went south and came back north. So I mean, it's different, and certainly in 2004, even though it's the recent past, it's a different culture, it's a different place, and I'm just wondering, obviously, as a professor of African American and African studies, and the intersection of so many different things, labor history, the arts, and culture, and everything that you've been able to have a hand in, just what that experience has been like and how that's evolved for you at UVA over these 2 decades.
Sure. So I get to UVA in 2004. The student population at UVA is probably about 10% African American at that point. It had dropped a little bit from sort of the golden age of the 90s when it was like 13%, and right now it's like 7 to 8%. It was completely different. Different reality, but there was a openness that I learned here. And I never forget someone coming to me and saying, this is going to be tough and this is going to be difficult. Philly was tough and difficult, especially for my mother. I'm pretty sure the first year they all thought I was going to get hit by a bus on Broad Street. But it prepared me. But I walked into the classroom, and one of the things that I knew, and I think sports teaches you this, is that you have to take people for their word and trust the process. And I remember going into class and I said, I cannot assume that these students feel a certain way about me because I'm a black woman. I got to come in there and just bring it. And that's what I did. And that's how I build community. And yeah, there's been a lot of changes in the past 22 years. It has experienced political assaults. It has experienced tragedy ranging from the white supremacist rallies of August 11th and 12th to a student, one of my students, murdering 3 students. Of course, in 2022, we endured the tragic killing of the 3 football players. And it has also seen some highs and it's seen some lows. I have had 3 different presidents over the past year and a half, still an interim provost. And so all of the transformations taking place in the nation, in the world, in higher education, I've experienced them at UVA, and I've been committed to being a part of something that tries to make the place better, that tries to push it forward in a more positive direction. And it's because of the example that I saw at Temple, where there was always this question about what is the university's responsibility to the community? What is the university's responsibility to Philadelphia? What is the university's responsibility to not just the faculty, not just the students, but the people who come in every day? And what I didn't know then that I know now is that that seed was being planted. It's so interesting to even be in the center right now because I never played here, but I remember all of the debate surrounding the building of the Apollo.
Sure.
And I didn't get them all. I didn't understand sometimes the debates between, John Street and John Chaney, but the seed was being planted. And so much of what I think I do, studying the history of the university, documenting the African American experience, I think it meant something for me to be here when there was a black football coach, a women's basketball coach, and men's basketball coach. I saw African Americans in leadership positions. And so, of course, I would go to UVA and think that certain things were possible. Because it was always, our motto then was, embrace the Temple Challenge. And so I have tried to do that at every step.
I think it's so interesting to hear the way that you take on it goes beyond the mission, just the way you take on the fabric of what this place means and carry that forward, I think is something really special and something that I think you're in a particular position to speak to just because you come from Temple, you were a student athlete here, you've remained in academia. One of the kind of big picture conversations we've been having through this podcast and bringing all sorts of different perspectives to it is just how the role of college athletics has evolved for better and for worse in the time since you were a student athlete. It's changed tremendously, and I think in some ways that's been a positive, and in some ways it's been a negative. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, on the academia side of it, just kind of what you've seen. I know there was a fun little Easter egg that you taught Michelle Vitisse and Carissa Vitisse, our field hockey coaches. They were students of yours. So I know that you have continued, obviously, to intersect with the athletics world. And I'm just wondering your perspective as a former student athlete, but also as a professor, just kind of how you've seen the evolution of everything and your thoughts on it.
Sure. First of all, they were stellar students, always came to class prepared, always ready. And I've always said the folks who are the best on the court are also oftentimes the best in the classroom. And I think about people like Malcolm Brogdon, who was a student of mine and who decided to forego the NBA when he knew he would be a high draft. I mean, eventually was drafted but wanted to get his master's in public policy. And when you look at some of the things that he's doing around water and accessibility in Africa, it's amazing. There's been a lot of changes. I am nervous about tonight. And I had dinner with Arthur, and I just asked the question. I said, what is this landscape like? Well, am I going to be talking to student athletes who've been at Temple for 3 years or 3 months? Do I need to tell them how to have a transformative experience for 2 months if you decide to leave? And so that is something that, the shift in the portal, the movement, it was nothing better than meeting a student their first year, and they would take my intro class, and I know that I would have them for 3 to 4 more years, and we would grow together. It's still an opportunity, but it's not the same. they have a lot of responsibilities. They have a lot of opportunities. Sometimes less interaction with other students. You're going to learn a lot of lessons from non-student athletes, or who we used to call the regular people. But you learn a lot. And that's one of the things that I've seen. So I think it's great that students can have their own apartments and their own dormitories, and at a place like UVA, their own eating spaces and cafeteria. But we want to make sure that we are protecting that college experience. There's nothing like college. There's nothing like 4 years together. There's nothing like spending an hour and a half or hour and 15 minutes in a classroom 2 days a week. There's a level of intimacy and contact that you're not going to really have with anyone besides your most immediate family. And the opportunity to collectively learn together. And so those are some of the things that I've seen. Of course, I have struggled not to say the Atlantic 10.
Yeah.
So also conference realignment.
Yep.
One of the big concerns that I have from a student athlete perspective is, what does it mean when my students now are going to be traveling to California?
Yeah.
And so I immediately, when, the ACC expanded, that was a big concern of mine, because I remember when we would play, and it was rare in California, that was usually during the break.
Mm-hmm.
That was during a time where you were not in class, you were not in school. And so realignment is just what happens to rivalries. And so I've even had to adjust to my memories. None of us, I don't know what it'll feel like to tell that St. Bonaventure story.
Right.
It's a different realignment. And also, I think, student athletes are still a part of higher education. When I think about some of the classes, and when I think about some of the majors and the departments that are under scrutiny, they are majors and departments that our student athletes are intimately involved in. And so what happens to higher education, it matters. And it's not us versus them. We're all in this together. And so those are the things that I think about, when a student athlete comes in my class. And I've tried not to be that person, because they look at me now and it's like, you didn't play. First Harold, I bet you was sorry. But I try not to be that person. But, I want to tell them, take advantage of all the opportunities. You get a free education. Student debt and college affordability is the biggest issue for young people.
Yeah.
A lot of young people are delaying buying a home, starting families, because of student debt. And here you have the opportunity to go to school for free. I stayed in the bookstore buying books because they were free. Getting books, and I have students now who have to make a choice of, do I buy a book or do I pay the light bill? Because college tuition has become so expensive that even, and these are upper middle class folks.
Sure.
But if you're at UVA and your brother's at Duke and the other, the sisters at Virginia Tech, they have to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so here you have that opportunity. Don't come to class without your book.
Well, I think that is it's a really needed perspective, because sometimes, and again, this is the only job I've ever had. I graduated in 2010 and have worked in college athletics, and I feel like it's just, the changes have been seismic only in the last 16 years. And it does help to have someone with a perspective to remind us of the basics of what we do and why we do it, and to bring it back to there's a reason that we work in college and not in professional sports. And I think that's a very encouraging message. And so I think that's a great place to circle back to, which is, since you said you were a little bit nervous as we're sitting here, we're sitting in the Liacouras Center, we're overlooking the Stella's Awards, the annual celebration banquet here at the end of our academic year, and you get to address about 500 student athletes momentarily. So again, I'm thankful for your time, but but I'm wondering, have you landed on what you want that message to Temple student athletes to be, what you want them to take away from getting to hear you and getting to see you in the position that you have tonight?
I do. My message is Temple made, and what it means to be a Temple made student athlete, and what it means to have access to a world-class education in a global city, and how using those resources can not only elevate you but promote human flourishing. And we need student athletes to take advantage of this Temple-made opportunity because the world desperately needs them.
I think that's it's really powerful. I'm sure that it will resonate with this group. And again, this has just been a treat for me to get to hear a little bit of your story over this last half hour. But I'm so glad that we could have you back on campus. What a great representation of everything that Temple is. And I wish you the best and hope that we can have you back in Philadelphia again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, that's this week's episode of the Owl Pod. I want to thank my guest, Dr. Claudrena Harold. A reminder, David Litvin and Amelia Wright are back one last time on the Owl Pod next week with their sign-off episode, so please check that out. If you want to support the Owl Pod, please be sure to subscribe, leave a rating. Most of all, please tell your friends. Scroll back. We've got over 50 episodes in the feed that you can listen to on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts. And, of course, follow us on Instagram at The Owl Podcast. I want to give a special thanks to our Owl Pod team for getting this thing off the ground this year, especially our Vice President and Debbie and Stanley Lefkowitz, 65 Director of Athletics Arthur Johnson, our Executive Producer Dan Lobaz. I'm Kevin Copp. Thanks for listening, and go Owls.